You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gerd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-commerce strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode. Today's episode is sponsored by Swap and Grab, and more about them later. Let me set the scene for our conversation. We're diving into cross-border commerce and how to make it better and look at different ways of expanding internationally. We've got a highly experienced guest on the podcast today. I had the pleasure of doing a roundtable at Vivant's recent Pulse event on this and other topics, which is quite interesting. I thought this would make a really good expanded podcast version. So warm welcome to Cian Wright, who heads up partnerships and Swap. How are you, Cian?
Pretty good. I can't complain. Sat here in Toronto currently, so hanging out with all the ecosystem additions.
See, I think it's because of the Irish connection why you can't complain. Because if you're in England, then can complain is the default version of that. It's something we do very well.
We can't complain about the English, but in general, we're trying not to complain.
We don't have enough time for that. Right, let's get into this discussion, because I really enjoyed it. When we had that roundtable, I thought there's some really interesting questions came out around some of the challenges retailers face around cross-border, and also where Swap is now fitting into this. And I know that a lot of people know Swap from the returns, which is like the kind of heartland of the product, but you are like evolving out and you have a cross-border solution. So before we get into the questions on cross-border, do you want to give people a bit of introduction to you and your background, and maybe set the context for like Swap in cross-border?
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm kind of coming up on probably 15 years deep in e-commerce for my sins. Started off brand side, 10 years doing that was, more than enough in the challenging space. And then I had the pleasure of going to Shopify for about 4 years, where, I was working across various commercial roles and kind of finished my time there working on market development, so building out these kind of experimental partnership programs and try to scale them and make them into something more stable. So, a lot of my background really e-com brand side, e-com tech side, and more recently at Swap, we kind of came into the space looking at returns as a challenge, and saw all kinds of things we could do, but ultimately we moved towards actually trying to deliver on the entire operational problem in one platform. So Swap went from being a returns-focused product to offering returns, cross-border duty and tax calculation, package protection, order tracking, repairs, recycling, and warranty, all under one roof. And that's been a massive change, as we move through.
Cool. I didn't realise you'd launched and run about. I knew your background from Shopify, so that's quite interesting. That's questions and stories for another day. But let's get into this then. So let's start with the strategy and the trends, and then we'll get into like the product and the solution and the advice bit. But what trends are you guys seeing in cross-border? Like, which countries are merchants focused on at the moment? What are the key challenges they're trying to unpick?
Yeah, I think honestly, economically things are not how everyone would like them to be. And coming out of some pretty strong years, brands are really searching for answers to those questions. And I think in the UK, post-Brexit, a lot of people just said, look, the market's strong enough domestically and in the US potentially, and we're just not going to look at Europe anymore. And I think that's something that's really changed. Those brands, like we speak to brands every day of the week who said, oh yeah, in the years post-Brexit, we just gave up on that European trade. Even though it was a nice little percentage, it seemed too complicated. So I think this downturn or tightening of the belt has really pushed people to kind of come out and look at getting back into the EU in the UK. And also, in general, looking at that economic trend, people are trying to find new revenue streams, new ways to balance the books and get more orders in, and going cross-border makes a ton of sense. And I think the big thing for us, traditionally, you look at a US brand and they hit something like 10, 15 million GMV before they even start thinking about trading outside of the US. We've always traded quite early in the life cycle cross-border, and for the UK, that's just become infinitely more challenging.
Grebin create digital flagship stores for iconic brands of today and tomorrow. We are the #1 Centra agency in the world, with more than 50 Centra implementations to date. We are also e-commerce design specialists, platform and tech partner agnostic. Try our new e-commerce design subscription. Visit grebin.com.
Yeah, I find it interesting because a lot of the smaller businesses I work with did the same. They gave up on the EU post-Brexit just because it wasn't necessarily that they couldn't make it work cost-wise. It was the effort and the paperwork and the admin and concern about being non-compliant. And I definitely it feels like there's greater positivity, and I'm seeing more people now really focusing on the European market, which is interesting. So that positivity definitely seems to be creeping back in.
100%. And there's also countries out there where so many of the brands in the space are reliant on meta costs being in a sensible place. And there are countries out there where that still exists. And there is, even in certain lower income countries, there is a market for premium goods. There is a market for all sorts of pricing tiers that you can acquire at a lower cost. So I just think that there's all this opportunity cross-border, and brands are at a place now where the focus is back to have to do it, and they're pushing to find these kind of answers,
Yeah, and what I find interesting, I was listening to another chat, and I think it was at IRX this year. There was a lady who represents like Polish trade organisation talking about opportunities in countries in the broader like Europe and EU that are often untapped because people focus on France, Germany, etc. Countries like Poland, which actually have a really significant online shopping base and real big income potential that are not as competitive because fewer foreign brands and businesses sell on there. So it feels like actually the cross-border opportunity is often a bigger and maybe less onerous than people perceive. So let's move on to what you guys are doing then, because there'll be some people on here who will have outsourced their cross-border. People have used merchant record solutions like globally. I mean, that a good few years back was pretty much the default option for everybody who wants to expand, who didn't have the resources in-house themselves. How does Swap's approach differ? What are you if you're not a merchant record solution?
When you look at the space, cross-border in general, people typically view it as synonymous with what a merchant of record solution is and the pros and cons that come with that. We don't necessarily have this like buzzy term like merchant of record for that kind of explains what we do, but ultimately we're taking care of the tax burden or the customs and duties burden for the merchant and allowing them to deliver the goods, duties paid. So you get the exact same outcome as a merchant of record solution, i.e. a customer receives an item and that item costs exactly what it said at checkout, and they don't get an angry follow-up letter from DHL, etc., saying you owe us 50 quid. But within that, we do things a little bit differently. So not being the merchant of record, we do not purchase the goods from the brand to sell to the customer. So we're not an intermediary from that perspective. And when you don't do those things, it changes a lot of the process for you, right? So when you're a merchant of record, you're essentially capturing the funds. The customer actually pays the merchant of record, and the merchant of record would disperse the funds after the fact to the brand. That's something we don't do. And because of that, we don't have to go in and say, checkout hijack with a Shopify. So from all of our customers, they use the exact standard Shopify checkout, with the exception of there being a small little box that says your duties are this, your taxes are this, and your shipping is this, and it calculates it all for you. We guarantee that. And, if we were to miscalculate for any given reason, we would eat the difference. But ultimately, that is the only front-end presence we have on the Shopify store. For brands shipping into Europe, we can remit the taxes for them in any of the EU states through our own systems. For brands shipping into the US, we tell you what your nexus exposure is, and we would then be able to file you for tax if you did hit tax nexus in any individual state. And, essentially, we're delivering all of the necessary steps to trade cross-border without getting in the middle and being the seller. And that's been a really interesting proposition to the customers that have come on board with us and the customers we speak with, because they're faced with situations where, as I was saying, their payments don't go to them anymore, right? The payment gets captured at checkout and goes to this merchant of record, and then it comes back to them, and they need to dive through the accounts and the invoices to figure out, is this all right? How are the FX rates working, et cetera, et cetera. Operationally, they have to ship the goods to the merchant of record to ship it to the customer. And that eliminates a lot of choice when it comes to warehouse, shipping rate, shipping providers, et cetera. And so all of those things, I think, add up to what I would say are a lot of detractors to the merchant of record model. Even though, it does offer convenience, et cetera, we offer the exact same outcome without any of that interference.
Swap is the e-commerce operating system powering brands looking to scale, from shipping, tracking and package protection to returns and cross-border. Swap improves every pain point in your operations journey, trading your tech stack for the one system that can manage it all. This is e-commerce evolved. Yeah, it's interesting. I think the follow-on to that is exploring what the implications are, I think, operationally. Because as you say, that taking it all in one, it has its drawbacks in terms of control, but at least it's got, I think for some people, out of mind, is like, okay, well, we've done our bit. You're taking the order, you're sending it, we've given you the stock. In terms of setting expectations, if a merchant is working with your solution rather than merchant record, operationally the responsibility for the warehousing, and the dispatch and the shipment, etc., to the customer sits with them, right? So they need to have all of those agreements in place. You're not taking ownership of that part. Yeah. So that
we don't,
great choice comes great responsibility.
We're not a 3PL, right? We're not a fulfillment center or anything like that.
Yeah.
So what we're looking to do is to provide the brand the option to run their domestic and international operations in the same way, right? So what is the difference between a domestic and an international package that you want to land into another country with the duties paid? It's the type of label that gets slapped on it, right? So if it has a DPP label, so duties prepaid, it's going to land into that country with no interference, none of the, additional fees, none of it getting held at customs, etc., just like it would if it was sold via merchant record. So we offer DDP rates. So we have them. We have rates of our own that we can provide to customers. But if they have their own, they can also use those. If they have them via an aggregator, they can use those. And I think as much as you can look at a merchant of record as, I'm handing the burden over to someone else, what we're trying to say is actually you can operate exactly how you do right now. And the only difference really is a label and some customs documents that need to be affixed. And most brands are pretty capable of shipping packages, right? If they've not got that down, they're in real trouble regardless. And if they're not, their 3PL is. And yeah, well, when we work with brands, it's really to unify the whole process of domestic and international from an operations perspective.
So just to help people, because if you're new to this, the whole international, the operations and the tooling and what you use and who does which part, some people might be used to like solutions like Avalara for tax management. Can you tease out for people, how do you differ? What are you doing that because Avalara obviously will do tax calculations. What's the added value, I guess, of these service that they're getting from Swap versus just using a tax calculation?
Yeah, so tax calculation is obviously, it's surfacing the price obligation, right? But it doesn't really do anything beyond that. So what we do is we guarantee that rate, we guarantee the calculation, and then we can actually remit that piece to the local government on your behalf. So we pay the taxes on your behalf. We're registered in all the individual countries, and we take care of all of the taxation piece. Then, for example, if you were shipping into the States and you were a larger brand and you cleared the tax nexus threshold in New York or California, we would go and register your company for tax in that individual state. So a lot of it's actually in the back end, in the regulatory stuff. We're taking care of all of the taxation payments, paperwork, filing, etc. on your behalf, and everything that kind of happens behind the scenes clears you to ship into those countries, no questions asked. So, Avalara company, they will calculate that tax for you. We kind of take it from there.
But what about drawback. People will be thinking, right, okay, so nothing's ever straightforward. What's the implementation of this? So somebody wants to use Swap to help them accelerate their international expansion. How does that get turned on? Because you've got a piece in the Shopify system where you've got to do the calculations in checkout to get the right taxation. And then there's got to be a piece that ensures wherever the warehousing is that the information is there to print the correct labels, etc., to make sure things dispatch. So how does that piece work? How do you get set up? How long does it normally take from an installation point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty quick process. We have a Shopify app, obviously, and you install that, and that takes care of all the front end piece. Then you get into the process with one of our friendly onboarding managers. So I'm sure some people listening might have been dealing with Jack, who takes care of all of that first. And essentially, at that point, we're running through how the labels get generated, what WMS you're using, all of the standard information we need for the tax and regulation kind of stuff. And we've had people on board in very, very quick timelines, like days, quite typically. That's not a massive challenge. The front end impact is very limited. So from that perspective, needing ecom manager or design development resources isn't really an issue. It only affects checkout, and it's only this small gray box. So that piece is very straightforward. Getting niche WMSs integrated can always be interesting, but that's stuff we take care of on a day-to-day basis. And we also have iPaaS partners, systems integrators, etc. So I guess the simple answer is it's not a very complicated process. The more fleshed out answer is there could be some complexity based on how niche your tech stack might be.
And there's another question that will come up from people. Will be thinking, okay, what's the cost model? So how does it actually work? On what basis is it charged? Like, is it a license? Is it per order?
Yeah. So basically we work on a percentage of the order, and that would be the contents of the cart, not the shipping, duties, or taxes. And that price can be paid by the brand, so they can pay it as a fee, or it can also be baked into the cost of the cart so that the customer pays it. So depending on how the brand wants to approach this, we can round up the numbers and make everything look nice, but ultimately that fee could be passed on to the end customer, or they can pay it themselves. And we would bill them monthly against the orders that have been shipped and calculated by us.
And you obviously work with a lot of merchants who are selling to different countries, different product types, different levels of complexity. And shipments and returns is always a challenge in cross-border. Can you talk us through a bit about what is your advice about how merchants can maintain a consistent customer experience when they're handling returns at this level? And where do you guys fit into that piece?
Yeah, definitely. I think really unifying the two has actually been quite complicated for brands, particularly if they're going that merchant of record route, because again, everything operationally is segmented. You're not the touch point with the goods, the access to that data may be quite limited, etc. So I think one of the big value adds we've experienced with most of our customers who've come on board with this is actually being able to handle the returns and the outbound order simultaneously, and having access to all of that data, and that customer being able to do a standard returns process with Swap like they would on a domestic order, which, using a merchant record solution actually wasn't a possibility, unfortunately. The big thing that I think something brands haven't quite realized traditionally is that, when you ship an order that requires duty payment cross-border and that customer returns it, you owe that duty back. And a lot of our customers, didn't quite realize that, or didn't have an automated setup, and, potentially an accountant had to go in, dig through the books, make filings, etc. We've actually automated that entire process through Swap. So now every time a cross-border order where duties or taxes have been paid is returned, that cash figure gets sent back to the brand. And sometimes when you look at those backdated for some of the mid to large size brands, the figures can really, really tot up to something quite extreme. And that's been a bit of a wake-up call for us for actually how important this is. This is something we've done even prior to doing the cross-border. We did duty drawback on returns as something that made a ton of sense to us as a value add, but it just gets more and more valuable as you add the cross-border piece as well.
Yeah, that bit's really interesting. You mentioned it when we were doing the roundtable. I hadn't even thought about that as part, because one of the big challenges with investing in any partners or any automations is around the business case and the return on investment. And returns rates vary massively, as you well know, across, whether it's by country or by product type. And I didn't realize that there was a mechanism for doing that. So I can imagine there are some financial controllers or finance directors out there who probably listen into this and go, well, that's quite interesting. I didn't realize I could potentially be clawing back a significant chunk of money every year.
That's it. I mean, I think really CFOs, once they learn about the impact of, the newer types of return software, get pretty interested pretty quickly when you can say, oh, well, a third of all refund requests sent in a gift card or exchange, duty drawback type figures, and break in consolidation of tech stack with people like us. And, in this economic reality that we're in, you need to be CFO friendly. You need to surface really strong arguments to that person to win. And I think it's become quite clear that this duty drawback is a big one.
Well, I think it's anything where you can strengthen the business case, because you can put the business case on how it might increase your conversion rate or attract additional audiences. Maybe it helps you reduce abandonment. But anything where it's tangible cost reduction is the bit that gets finance teams excited. One area that I was interested in was that you work with repair and recycling partners, and that's not something I know in terms of yours, like how you work. And I know much about that in terms of swap. So can you talk us through, like, how does that work? Are you seeing a rise in interest in this? Because I'm definitely seeing it in other walks of e-commerce where the sustainability angle is having a big impact, and it also has a big impact in terms of the influence on shoppers and their brand choices. So talk us through what this is and what the relevance to merchants is.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been huge amounts of interest in this for us. I think brands, when they look at the space, most brands care about the environment by default. Most people care about the environment by default, but there's always the challenge of where it sits in your priority list, and it's often been viewed as a very clear cost center as opposed to a revenue driver. I think we've approached these kind of initiatives from a place of how can we find a happy medium with both, like drive revenue, build brand, whilst also doing something sustainable and positive for the planet. So, our day-to-day has been in the return space, which is ultimately a reverse logistics journey, right? Taking something from a customer to somewhere else, back to a warehouse, etc. So when you're doing that and owning that from, potentially providing the shipping carrier, generating the label, potentially creating a gift card, you also are pretty well set up to do things like buyback programs or resale programs, because it is effectively the same journey. So what we've seen with some of our customers, I'll do some name dropping because why not? We have a brand, Loki, which is a vegan footwear brand, and they do these really incredible shoes. They have a buyback program in place, and buyback programs have been running in major retailers for years and have probably been massive revenue generators for them, and now it's becoming something more open to the D2C brands. But with Loki, they'll accept any pair of footwear, regardless of who the brand is, so Nike, Adidas, etc. And if you recycle your runners or your trainers through them, they'll give you a $25 gift card, for example, again against that as a reward. So with Swap, we collect that order, we generate the shipping label for the customer, we generate the gift card that they receive, and then it gets picked up and dropped off at a recycling provider. Now, that recycling provider can be the brand's recycling provider that they have an individual relationship with. We also have a recycling provider that we work with, where we can route goods for any of our customers. So, regardless of size, we can support here. And for that gift card being generated and, a couple of pounds in shipping costs to get it from point A to point B, they're getting the customer's name, their physical address, their email address, their size, maybe some idea of style preference, at a cost that's probably quite a bit lower than Meta for customers that are engaged with their brand, interested in buying this type of footwear. And then they're selling a $250, $300 pair of footwear against a $25 gift card. And, they're incredibly net positive on it. If they don't sell it day one, they've got all of this great data to start targeting those customers with. And look, it's not the norm for our customers to accept any other brand. I think it makes sense in a very competitive footwear market with big players. But for a lot of our brands doing this kind of stuff, they're selling into third-party retailers. They're selling into major high street. And this is potentially a way of getting that customer to go from buying in a high street retailer to buying online. Because once they recycle through them, they get the data that they never had before, and they start pulling them into that own channel. And then to give another example of how a brand might approach this, the team at Hera have done a resale program, and essentially similarly to the buyback, we generate the shipping label, gather all the data, and get it shipped back to their 3PL. And then it all gets relisted on a really nice front-end experience that I believe Voster built. And that is a full secondary marketplace of Hera goods. So they're buying these goods from their own customers, relisting them again, and having this full sustainability initiative. So that's all stuff we can power in the back end, where a brand can do really great things for the planet, but also balance the books with it.
I love that. Yeah, really interesting. Really cool example as well about buying back shoes that aren't even your own. It's nice to see people thinking a little bit differently. So, final question, Cian, is you guys obviously come a long way from the initial days of just only being focused in on the returns piece. And cross-border is huge. Where is the solution headed? Like, what's coming up? Have you got any key roadmap things you can talk us through?
Yeah, I think honestly right now the goal is to own anything from post-purchase to end of life for goods. So anything that happens after the order is completed is of a lot of interest to us. We also play a little bit before that with package protection, etc. But there's a lot of different areas in the logistics and operational stack that could do with reimagining and also consolidating. And I think a lot of the work we're putting in right now is, getting those features that our customers want most into the existing products, adding as many data points. So for anyone who's been in the admin, it's a very data heavy admin, and we're getting requests every day of the week to add more graphs, more visibility. So I think the roadmap currently is really focused on fleshing out those products so that they have every feature, building out an integrations roadmap so all of tech stack is integrated and you can push data to your marketing stack regardless of what that is. And then really doubling down on our data availability, etc. So, particularly as we're going cross-border, the information that tells you where to go next or where the cost of acquisition might be most interesting, all that stuff starts really becoming super relevant in a way that it hadn't necessarily first when we were just doing returns or order tracking, etc. So I think, we move pretty quickly. If I had said to you February of last year that we'd be at 5 products now, I wouldn't have believed it. So who knows? We could pull some interesting rabbits out of the hat as well. But I think right now, data and integration roadmap, etc., are real priorities for us.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Really enjoyed that. Thank you. And if anyone listening wants to probe you a bit further on any of these areas or get into details about how the solution could work for them or even challenge you on any of this, because we like a good debate on this podcast, how do they reach out?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can see me posting many annoying posts about my travels. You'll also see Swap at probably just about every event on the planet. If you have gripes, you should come find me. If you don't and have nice things to say, you'll see Dean, Gabby or Charlene lurking about. And yeah, we've now added Charlene in the US, so anyone from the US listening in will be more present and more active over there for you.
Cool. And we'll have a link on the landing page, so do check it out, everybody. And thanks for listening. I hope you found it interesting. I hope it's provoked a bit of thoughts or discussions in your business around the cross-border piece. And make sure you're following Inside Commerce on LinkedIn and have subscribed to our Inside Commerce newsletter. Until next week, everyone. You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gerd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-com strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.